What you lack is not technology, but a dirty factory. Imagine you are the Secretary of Defense of the most powerful nation on Earth. Your fleet of F-35 stealth fighters, your nuclear submarines, your missile guidance systems, all of them are running perfectly. But this morning, a report lands on your desk. It says, if the country on the other side of the Pacific decides tomorrow to stop shipping a group of metals you've probably never heard of, every single one of your advanced weapon systems will start breaking down within a few years. This is not a movie plot. This was the very real nightmare facing senior Pentagon officials in the mid-2000s. The story begins in 1787, when a Swedish military officer named Carl Axel Arrhenius stumbled upon a strange, unusually heavy black rock at a small quarry in a village called Ytterby, outside Stockholm. That rock eventually reached Finnish chemist Johan Gadolin, who discovered it contained a completely unknown substance, something chemists of the era simply called an earth, meaning an oxide compound that couldn't be broken down further. They named it Etria, after the village. 4 elements discovered from that same quarry ended up named after Ytterby, a record that still stands in chemical history. But here's what matters for our story. Rare earths aren't actually rare in the ground. Calcium, for example, is more abundant in the Earth's crust than copper. The word rare refers to how maddeningly difficult these 17 elements are to separate from each other, because chemically, they are nearly identical. For over a century, this made them scientifically fascinating, but commercially useless. That changed in 1961, when scientists discovered that europium, one of the rare earth elements, produced a uniquely vivid, stable red glow. It became the key ingredient in color television screens. Almost overnight, rare earths went from laboratory curiosities to globally sought-after industrial materials. As color TV demand exploded through the 1970s and 1980s, and as the energy crisis drove demand for rare earth-powered fluorescent lighting, the Mountain Pass mine hit its peak. At its height, the United States alone supplied nearly 60% of the world's rare earth raw materials. America was, without question, the global number 1. The company running all of this was called Molycorp, the forerunner of what later became MP Materials. They held the most advanced rare earth refining technology in the world and supplied television manufacturers, petroleum refining industries, and early electronics companies around the globe. But here's the thing about rare earth separation. It is an extraordinarily dirty business. The refining process required massive quantities of strong acids like sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid, along with strong alkalis like ammonia and sodium carbonate, all reacting at high temperatures through repeated cycles of dissolving, precipitating, and washing. This produces large volumes of acid wastewater, laced with heavy metal ions. Solid waste contain radioactive thorium and uranium, and toxic gas emissions. In the 1950s through the 1970s, environmental awareness in America was still in its infancy. Molycorp's wastewater was simply dumped into the surrounding desert, contaminating vast stretches of land over many years. When the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency began enforcing strict regulations in the 1990s, a cascade of remediation orders and massive fines began drowning the company in red tape. Then in 1998, an accidental pipeline rupture sent hundreds of thousands of gallons of radioactive wastewater pouring into a nearby nature reserve. that was the final straw. The mine essentially shut down by 2002. America did not lose to China in technology. It didn't lose in resources either. America lost to the values it had chosen to uphold: environmental protection. And that's a double-edged sword. You can simultaneously demand the world's strictest environmental standards and also run the dirtiest industrial operations at the bottom of the supply chain. While America was putting down that burden, on the other side of the Pacific, one man was picking it up and using a life team of scientific research to hand it to his country. To understand how China rose to dominate rare earths, you have to know one name: Xu Guangxian. Born in 1920 in Zhejiang province, he earned his doctorate at Columbia University, then returned to China to devote himself to chemistry research. He is known in China as a father of rare earths. His greatest achievement was solving the problem that had tormented chemists for a full century: how to separate rare earth elements cheaply, at high purity, and at industrial scale. Before Xu Guangxian, the dominant separation technique was called ion exchange. It could achieve high purity, but it was agonizingly slow and expensive, completely unsuitable for large-scale industrial production. There was another approach called solvent extraction. Faster, but with poor purity, and extremely unstable in continuous industrial operations. The slightest parameter fluctuation could ruin an entire batch. Xu Guangxian used mathematics and chemical kinetics to deeply analyze the patterns inside the solvent extraction process. In the 1970s, he developed a complete theoretical framework called Countercurrent Extraction Theory. The core idea was to turn the entire extraction process into something that could be mathematically modeled and precisely engineered. Think of it like a perfectly calibrated assembly line. The mineral solution enters from one end, an organic solvent flows in from the other end in the opposite direction, and they interact through dozens of linked extraction tanks in sequence. Each rare earth element gets sorted like a precisely labeled package, flowing out of its own designated outlet, with purity reaching 99.99% and above. What made Xu Guangxian extraordinary was that he transformed complex experimental trial and error into calculable engineering design. Before his theory, building a rare earth separation plant required years of expensive, painstaking experiments. With his framework, an engineer could sit at a desk, calculate the optimal parameters for every extraction tank using formulas, and then build the plan according to the blueprint. And he would work on the first trial. Construction time shrank from years to months. Costs dropped by an order of magnitude. Even more critically, the Chinese government recognized this as a core strategic technology and pushed it across the entire country at top speed. Within just a few years, rare earth separation facilities were sprouting up across China's provinces like mushrooms after rain. And every single one of them was running at near optimal efficiency and low cost. In 2008, Xu Guangxian received China's highest science and technology award. The citation includes a line worth remembering. His work elevated China's rare earth separation capacity in a short period of time, from nearly zero to number one in the world. That same year, China's rare earth output accounted for more than 95% of global production. Armed with Xu Guangxian's technology, backed by government policy, sitting on the enormous mineral reserves of Inner Mongolia's Baotou region, and operating with labor and environmental costs that seem almost unreal by Western standards. China did something that is one of the most devastating moves in the history of commercial competition: unlimited, indefinite price dumping. In the 1990s, global rare earth prices began to collapse. Take lanthanum oxide as an example. In early 1990s, it cost roughly $5 to $8 per kilogram. By the early 2000s, Chinese exports had driven their price below $1 per kilogram. Australia's rare earth separation plants held on for a few years, then shut down. Canada's shut down. India's shut down. Germany's shut down. Europe's decades of accumulated rare earth expertise, the engineers, the scientists, the technicians, either change careers, retire, or move to China to find work. This was the most precise industrial extermination in commercial history. China didn't win a war. China made its opponents feel the war wasn't worth fighting. Once every rare earth separation plant around the world had closed, once the expensive equipment had been scrapped, once the scarce technical talent had scattered, starting over wouldn't take years. It would take decades. We can break down how China built its rare earth dominance into 4 interlocking moves. Each one, looked at in isolation, seems like a reasonable business decision. Together, they form the nearly unbreakable closed loop. The first move: owned separation technology. Xu Guangxian's countercurrent extraction theory was the foundation. But China's real cleverness was that they didn't just have one technology. They continuously poured national funding into iterating and improving it. Every few years, a new and better version. Competitors were always chasing a moving target. The second move: absorb the environmental cost. This is the most brutal and the hardest to replicate. In Bautu, Inner Mongolia, there is a place that has shocked every foreign journalist who has ever visited: a tailings pond, or more plainly, a man-made toxic lake. Decades of rare earth refining waste, liquid and solid, have accumulated here. The lake covers more than 10 square kilometers. It contains radioactive waste, heavy metals, and ammonia-nitrogen compounds. Groundwater contamination around Bautu has been a long-running problem. Cancer rates in surrounding villages are significantly above the national average. For a very long time, none of this was counted as a production cost in the rare earth industry. No market democracy could replicate this cost structure. These sunken environmental costs are the most solid and the most filthy foundation of China's rare earth supremacy. The third move: scorched-earth price war to clear the market. We've already covered this, but one more detail is worth adding. From the perspective of national strategy, China's dumping wasn't actually running at a loss. Since rare earths were China's own raw material, with low extraction costs, even rock-bottom export prices still generated some margin. The true loss was what you might call a long-term geopolitical investment. Accept years of low prices in exchange for decades of market monopoly. That is a decision that goes far beyond ordinary commercial logic. The fourth move, and the most devastating: integrate upward and take control of the high-value product. Don't just sell the ore, sell the magic. Once global competitors had been eliminated, China was no longer satisfied with selling cheap separated rare earth oxides. They started climbing up the value chain into manufacturing. The clearest example is the neodymium iron-boron permanent magnet, or NdFeB magnet. This is the most powerful permanent magnet known to humanity, every electric vehicle motor, every wind turbine rotation system, every precision-guided missile actuator. They all need it. Today, China produces more than 90% of the world's NdFeB permanent magnets. And making a good NdFeB magnet requires not just rare earth raw materials. It requires precise metallurgical techniques, strict production processes, and years of accumulated technical know-how that simply cannot be bought or copied overnight. This moat is deeper and harder to cross than any mine. Then came September 2010, and the moment that made the stakes crystal clear for the entire world. A Chinese fishing vessel collided with a Japanese Coast Guard patrol ship near the Senkaku Islands, what China calls the Diaoyu Islands. Japan arrested the Chinese captain and prepared to prosecute him for obstructing public duties. Within days, tensions escalated sharply. China's foreign ministry demanded the captain's immediate release. And then something strange happened. Rare earth cargo ships bound from China to Japan started getting held up at Chinese customs, subjected to what officials describe as enhanced routine inspections, with no end date. There was no written embargo order, no official announcement. The ships just did move. This is what's known as an informal embargo. No declaration of war, no sanctions, just quiet, invisible pressure that can send an industrialized nation that depends on rare earths into full-blown panic. It is one of the quietest and most effective weapons in the geopolitical arsenal. For Japan's manufacturing sector, those months were a genuine nightmare. Toyota, Hitachi, Mitsubishi Electric, every company that needed rare earths started frantically auditing its stockpiles. Some companies had only a few weeks of high-purity rare earths inventory left. In the end, under enormous industrial pressure, Japan chose to release the captain without prosecution. The incident left a lasting scar on Japan. It forced government officials, business leaders, and academics alike to confront a sobering reality. Rare earth dependency was a fatal hole in national security. Japan's response reflected the core DNA of Japanese manufacturing. Make every gram count. Toyota, Honda, and Shin-Etsu Chemical all poured massive resources into a single goal: reduce rare earth consumption as much as possible without sacrificing performance. The key breakthrough was a technique called grain boundary diffusion. Instead of spreading heavy rare earth elements evenly throughout a magnet, the material is concentrated precisely on the surface of individual crystal grains. The same performance is achieved with far less material, sometimes cut in usage by more than half. The precision required to do this is at the nanometer scale. This is something Japan can do that most countries in the world still cannot. In 2012, the US Department of Defense published an assessment report, and its conclusions were deeply unsettling. Multiple critical American weapon systems, including the F-35 Lightning II fighter jet, the Virginia-class nuclear submarine, and SM-3C-based anti-missile system, all contain rare earth components sourced from Chinese supply chains, and the United States had no way to supply itself domestically. Each F-35 required roughly 417 kilograms of rare earth materials, used in its superconducting magnets, radar systems, electronic warfare equipment, and thrust vectoring controls. Building a single Virginia-class nuclear submarine requires approximately 9,200 kilograms of rare earth materials. And then came the moment that made the whole situation look almost comically absurd. Around 2015, the Mountain Pass mine in California reopened for a second attempt at production and started pulling significant quantities of rare earth ore out of the ground. The people running the mine then made a humbling discovery. There was no longer a single rare earth separation facility of industrial scale operating anywhere in the United States. So they loaded the ore onto cargo ships, sailed it across the Pacific to China, paid Chinese factories to use strong acids and alkalis to refine it, and then bought the finished rare earth materials back and shipped them home to America. American rare earth ore, traveling halfway around the world and back, just to become what America actually needed. That one detail tells you more about the severity of the problem than any think tank report ever could. In 2019, at the peak of the US-China trade war, China's state media outlet, People's Daily, published a commentary suggesting China could restrict rare earth exports to the United States as a countermeasure. The article was deliberately paired with a photo of President Xi Jinping visiting a rare earth company. The moment that article went live, every rare earth related stock in the American market spiked immediately. Rare earth spot prices surged. The market's reaction said everything about how deep the fear ran in the Western world. But here's something worth noting. A full rare earth embargo is a weapon China has never actually fired, because it's a double-edged sword. If China truly cut off all exports, the chaos in global manufacturing would force every country to build domestic supply chains as fast as humanly possible, which would actually help China's competitors escape dependency. The threat of a rare earth embargo is therefore far more valuable as a strategic tool than actually carrying it out. So where does the story stand today? If you survey the responses that the rest of the world is actually pursuing, there are really only three paths. The first, work around rare earths entirely. Elon Musk and Tesla have been experimenting with rare earth-free electric motors. A company called Niron Magnetics is betting on iron nitride magnets. The trade-off is blunt and honest. Motors are bigger, heavier, and slightly less efficient, but you trade performance headroom for supply chain security. The second, build the supply chain the hard way. Companies like Linus Rare Earths and MP Materials are working to rebuild a complete chain inside the United States and allied countries, from mine to magnet. The difficulty isn't money, it's people. The technical expertise has been gone for so long that an entire generation of knowledge has simply vanished. The third, recover and recycle. Extract rare earths from discarded devices and end-of-life equipment. Recovery rates are still below 1% globally, but Japan and the European Union have started pushing this systematically. There are different paths, same essential reality. There is no solution without a cost. Every option requires paying a price that someone, somewhere, has been unwilling to pay, until now. The rare earth story is ultimately a story about one principle that plays out again and again in history. Control what others are unwilling to do, but cannot live without, and you control the world. That's what China understood. That's what the rest of the world is only now, slowly and painfully, beginning to reckon with.